My name is Amber Ingram, and this is my academic genre project for Paul Gallagher's English 122-472 class, titled Amber's Tips to High Elevation Gardening. I decided to do my project on high elevation gardening because gardening is a passion of mine. I enjoy the fresh air, the sunlight, and even the hard work. It's so rewarding to work the ground and reap the rewards in yummy fruits and veggies. I think it's important for people to get their hands in the dirt and to try and connect a bit with nature. And I think growing your own food is something that is quickly fading in our instant gratification society. Also, nothing beats fresh grown produce. If you've never had fresh strawberries, asparagus, tomatoes, or cucumbers from your backyard, you're really missing out. I've been gardening in Colorado now for 3 years, and every season I feel like I learn by trial and error. I often say I've learned what not to do next year. With poor soil quality, the short grow season, and inclement weather, the high elevation climate brings struggles and challenges to a successful garden harvest season. In this project, I'm going to really delve into and share what I've learned about soil health to hopefully save others some of the struggles that I've had, and to also learn more about how to help my garden prosper even more this next growing season. For this project, I want to talk about soil. One thing I've learned the hard way is that if your soil has issues, your plants will not thrive, period. Spending all that time planning and working the garden only for your plants to not grow to their full potential is very disappointing. Soil health is what I am personally putting my focus on for next year's garden. In hindsight, I've learned that the soil should be the first thing you look at when planning your garden, so that is what this first project will focus on. I'm planning on making amendments to my soil this fall so it can winter over, and then we'll also be adding to it next spring before planting begins. Here you'll see there are 4 main soil types: clay, sand, silt, and loam. Each type has different characteristics along with positive and negative attributes. I will tell you a bit about each soil type and discuss things you can do to improve your soil health. The first soil we're going to talk about today is clay soil. Most of us in Colorado have clay soil. Clay soil is defined as soil that is composed of mostly clay particles. The soil warms up slowly in the spring and is heavy to cultivate. It is clumpy and sticky when wet and rock hard when dry. You know you have clay soil if the soil sticks to your shoes and tools like glue and forms big clumps that are hard to separate. It can be challenging for roots to make their way through the hard soil. Clay also crusts over and cracks in dry weather. If you squeeze clay soil in your hand, it will mold instead of fall apart. It has few air spaces and doesn't drain well. With the addition of soil amendments, drainage can be improved and plants can develop and grow well, as clay soil can be rich in nutrients. Clay soil works well for perennials, shrubs, and trees. Just because you have clay soil, don't worry, all is not lost. To improve your clay soil, you just add lots of organic matter to your garden area. You should mix in organic material at a 25 to 50% ratio with the clay. Composted manures or other aged compost, straw, fine wood bark, and leaves all make great additions to clay soil types. It's helpful to add peat moss to the garden in the spring a few weeks before planting. To loosen heavy soils, adding sand can also help, but organic matter has the most benefits because of increased nutrients, water hold capabilities, and increased aeration. Another option to loosen the soil would be to add green sand, as it is beneficial for improving the mineral content. The next soil that I'm going to talk about is sandy soil. Sandy soil has a coarse-like texture, it feels gritty, drains easily, and dries out fast. It is easy to cultivate and warms up fast in the spring. It tends to hold less nutrients and has a lower moisture holding capacity, so it needs to be watered more frequently. It also has a lower nutrient holding capacity, so it needs to be fertilized more often. Sandy soil does well with shrubs and bulbs like tulips and hibiscus, and vegetable root crops like carrots and potatoes do well in a sandy soil. Sandy soil can be improved by the addition of organic matter. Things like topsoil, mushroom compost, composted manure, kelp meal, and peat moss are a few great items to add to your sandy soil. You add at least 3 to 4 inches on the surface of your garden and incorporate well into the soil. The next soil type is silty soil. Silty soil feels soft and is finer than sand, but still feels gritty. It is commonly found in floodplains. Silty soil holds moisture well, but may be slow to drain and compacts easily. It makes good farmlands, but blows away easily in storms and gets carried downstream in floods. Silty soil is good for shrubs, climbers, grasses, and moisture-loving trees. Vegetable and fruit crops can thrive with adequate drainage. Because silt is so light and it erodes rather quickly, it is usually modified by mixing in mulches, fertilizers, sand, and other soil additives. This helps solve drainage issues and provides a better growing environment for plant life. It is recommended to till to a depth of at least 1 foot, add the soil amendments, and combine into the tilled soil thoroughly. Last but not least, loamy soil. Loam is considered the most desirable soil type for growing vegetable crops, flowers, shrubs, trees, and many ornamental plants. Loamy soil is an even mix of the sand, silt, and clay. There are different degrees of loamy soil when 1 or 2 of the soil types outnumber the other, like sandy loam, clay loam, silty clay loam, etc. Loam soil feels soft and fine. It is ideal because it retains moisture, but it also allows water to flow freely. It is full of nutrients and cultivates easily. Loamy soil warms up quickly in the spring, but doesn't dry out like the other soil types in the summer. Loamy soil requires regular upkeep by replacing organic matter back into the soil. You can enhance loamy soil by adding mulches, composts, and organic matter to your garden in between planting season. It is also recommended to rotate crops to help retain soil life. Need additional help determining your soil type? There's a couple things you can do to try and help you figure it out. One thing you can do is the water test. You pour water onto your soil. If it drains quickly, it is likely a sandy or gravelly soil. If it's clay soil, the water will take longer to sink in and sit on the surface. Another thing you can do is grab a handful of wet soil and softly compress it in your fist. If the soil is sticky and slick to the touch and remains intact, and it's the same shape when you let it go, kind of like Play-Doh, it'll be clay soil. Sandy soil will feel gritty and it'll crumble apart, and loamy and silty soils will feel smooth textured and hold their shape for a short period of time and then fall apart. You can also do a settle test with your soil. You add a handful of soil to a transparent jar or container, you add water and shake well, and then you leave it to settle for at least 12 hours. If it's clay and silty soils, they'll leave a cloudy water with a layer of particles at the bottom. Sandy soils will leave the water mostly clear and most of the particles will fall, forming a layer on the base of the container. Loamy soils will leave the water clear with layered particles on the bottom of the container, with the finest particles at the top. Now that we've talked about the different soil types, how to figure out what soil type you have, and how to enhance your soil for the greatest plant health, lastly, I want to talk about testing your soil. You can purchase a soil test kit or take a sample of soil to your local state extension office. Testing the soil helps to assess primary nutrients as well as pH levels. These normally test for pH, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. By testing your soil, you determine its exact condition so you can fertilize more effectively and have better soil health. It's recommended to test your soil periodically throughout the growing season, every couple weeks. The standard pH for soils usually ranges between 4.0 and 8.5. Most plants prefer soil with a pH level between 6.5 and 7. This zone is where nutrients and minerals will thrive naturally. Some dark leafy greens as well as veggies like asparagus and squash prefer slightly higher alkaline soil conditions and will thrive at pH levels up to 7.5 or 8. If your pH level is low, you'll need to increase the pH level of your soil. You need to introduce alkaline materials. The easiest, most cost-effective, and fastest way to increase the alkalinity of your soil is with baking soda. You can also sprinkle about a half inch of wood ash over the soil and mix it into the top 6 to 8 inches of the soil. While this method can be highly effective if done properly, it's easy to oversaturate the soil with ash and you risk interfering with the plant's ability to take in nutrients. It's best to introduce wood ash very early on before planting and to not rush the process. Other options to raise your soil alkalinity is to use finely ground oyster shell, dried and pulverized eggshells, dolomitic limestone, also known as calcium magnesium carbonate, hydrated pulverized limestone, or agricultural lime. If your pH tests higher and your soil is in the alkaline range, in order to correct it, you will typically need to introduce some sort of an acid. Compost, manure, or organic soil amendments like alfalfa meal can be added to increase the nitrogen level of the soil, which will slowly decrease the pH level. Freshly ground coffee or brewed coffee has an average pH of about 4.5, so you can try watering your plants with leftover cold coffee that is diluted 50-50 with water. This method works better for smaller volumes of soil, such as for houseplants or container vegetables. Vinegar can also be used to naturally adjust the pH level of soil without the need for harsh, commercially manufactured products. A cup of vinegar mixed into a gallon of water can be sprayed onto the soil or introduced through an irrigation system. One of the quicker acting acidic soil additives is aluminum sulfate. It produces acidity in the soil as soon as it dissolves. If you need to urgently lower the pH level of your soil, aluminum sulfate is a great choice. Sulfur-coated urea will produce some effect within a week or so and will lower the pH level of the soil considerably over time. For heavily compacted soil with a high clay content, iron sulfate and aluminum sulfate are a good choice and takes about 3 weeks to take effect. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about nitrogen in your soil. Soil should contain an adequate supply of 40 ppm of nitrogen. To put it simply, plants need nitrogen to make themselves. Without nitrogen, a plant cannot make the proteins, amino acids, and even its very own DNA. This is why when there is a nitrogen deficiency in the soil, plants are stunted. They simply cannot make their own cells. Correcting a nitrogen deficiency using organic methods requires time, but will result in a more even distribution of nitrogen. Some organic methods of adding nitrogen to the soil include adding composted manure, planting a green manure crop, planting nitrogen-fixing plants like peas or beans, or adding coffee grounds to the soil. Non-organically, you can use a nitrogen fertilizer. This will give a big, fast boost of nitrogen to the soil, but will quickly fade. Nitrogen as a plant fertilizer is common when purchasing chemical fertilizers. When looking to specifically add nitrogen to your garden, you should choose a fertilizer that has a high first number in the NPK ratio. The NPK ratio will look something like 10-10-10, and the first number tells you the amount of nitrogen in it. Next up, as far as soil testing goes, is phosphorus. Phosphorus assists in the flowering and the formations of seeds and strong roots. Monitoring and correcting high phosphorus levels in soils will be essential in ensuring optimal plant growth in the garden season. Unlike other plant nutrients, phosphorus does not leach in the soil. This means that too much phosphorus can build up over the course of several seasons. Unfortunately, there's no ways to actively reduce excessive phosphorus in your garden soil. If you have high levels of phosphorus in your soil, it's crucial you avoid the use of fertilizers that contain any phosphorus for several growing seasons to help reduce the amount in the soil. Many growers choose to plant nitrogen-fixing plants like legumes, peas, or beans in gardens with excessive phosphorus. You can increase the amount of available nitrogen in the soil without fertilizing the garden bed, and it'll be helpful in returning soil conditions back to normal nutrient levels. Also, if you plant a winter crop over, such as clover, in the spring, you can simply till under the plants into your garden beds. As these plants decompose, they will raise the nitrogen in the soil and will make nitrogen available for the plants. Your garden will grow greener thanks to the plants that fix the nitrogen and their beneficial symbiotic relationship with bacteria. The last nutrient that we'll talk about today when testing your soil is potassium. Potassium is an essential nutrient in garden soil. It helps your plants take up nutrients and create protein. Potassium helps plants grow faster and stronger. Plants will use water better, be more drought resistant, and it also helps plants fight off disease and produce more. Some ways to increase potassium in your garden is to add things like compost, manure, green sand, or wood ash directly to your soil. You can also look for potash fertilizer, which is a fertilizer that is exclusively potassium, or look for a fertilizer that has a high K value. Thankfully, there is no level at which potassium becomes toxic to plants. However, when plants get too much potassium, the absorption of other nutrients is hindered, which can lead to problems caused by the lack of those nutrients. You can mix crushed eggshells, crushed seashells, wood ash, or soft rock phosphate to the soil to add calcium. You can mix up to 10% of organic compost to help amend the balance of your soil. If your potassium levels are high, it is recommended that you use a fertilizer with a 0 in the K value. You can also loosen the soil deeply with a shovel and water thoroughly to dissolve water-soluble potassium. You repeat this process after the soil has dried at least 2 times. Another option of reducing potassium is to sift through the soil and remove as many rocks as possible. Minerals occurring in rocks can slowly release potassium into the soil through weathering. Oddly enough, after years of gardening, I have never tested the soil in my garden. I will be ordering a test kit to test it this fall, and then again in the spring after I've made the necessary additions to my plot. I'm really interested to see the change after I've put some effort into getting my soil more well-rounded. After this research project, I plan to continue testing my soil regularly, and I think it will be interesting to see how the soil changes throughout the garden season. My main takeaway from all my soil research is that no matter what soil type you have, the key ingredient is testing and additives. You should be testing the soil regularly and adding things like compost, fallen leaves, straw, fine bark, dried grass clippings, peat moss, or green sand to your garden area. When you have several different mediums like this mixed in with your soil, it creates air pockets, so it doesn't compress as easily and allows the water to drain and the roots to grow. When you add organic material to the soil, the nutrient levels rise and the happier and healthier your plants will be. A heavy mulch or thick layer of straw on top is also beneficial to help retain moisture in the ground and will break down and incorporate into the soil, helping to build a new supply of organic nutrients and helping to improve and maintain soil structure and proper nutrient levels. And that concludes my project on soil health and the first step in how to be successful with a high elevation garden. I look forward to my additional projects where we touch different points on additional things that can help you be successful in gardening. Thanks for watching.